Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody to my fourth Tuesday Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Expert series to help you create a fulfilling second half of life. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner of Revolutionize Retirement and your host. The topic today is roads taken, work as an expression of the questions we're asking ourselves. And I just want to say you're in for a treat today. Fred Mandell is a very special person. I met him a number of years ago through the Life Planning Network, and I've had the opportunity, and it feels like a gift, to both talk with him at times and to hear him speak a number of times over the years. And let me tell you about him before we get going. Fred is a former American Express financial advisor executive, and it's currently Ameriprise, who built a leading marketing and sales business and ran a multi-billion-dollar investment company. During his tenure, he introduced new business models for the practice of fee-based financial planning into a large financial services institution. He currently heads up the Callan Leadership Group, or KLG, whose mission is to unleash the power of the arts to help leaders create a future that really matters. KLG works with corporate clients in the areas of leadership, innovation, and organizational culture. Fred is an author. Two of his books are Becoming a Life Change Artist, 7 Creative Skills to Reinvent Yourself at Any Stage of Life, and Can Art Save Us? I recommend both of the books, having read both of them. He's a nationally collective sculptor and painter and a catalyst for leadership change. He's helped thousands of individuals and their organizations to develop and create skills and enhance their personal and professional growth. In 2014, he launched the Global Institute for Arts and Leadership. It's a not-for-profit entity whose mission is to build a more peaceful, sustainable, and beautiful world by using the arts to catalyze social change. He currently serves as chairman of the board. And we certainly need that kind of a change in our world, so it's an important endeavor. As an artist, Fred has been featured in the national publication Gallery Guide. He's had one-person shows in Minneapolis, Providence, Rhode Island, Wellesley, Mass., and South Africa. His sculptures, paintings, and drawings are in private and corporate collections. Most recently, his bronze self-portrait has been commissioned for the International Conference on the Self, co-sponsored by the University of Chicago and the Sorbonne. Fred, I am so delighted that it's worked out for you to be able to join us today. And I thought it would be good. I know there are a number of things that people will have and that I have. If you can maybe start with some of the questions that really have impacted you and your journey and story, making all these changes that you've made. I think that would be a really great place to start.
Sure. Thanks, Dory. And by the way, congratulations on your 6th anniversary. What a wonderful milestone. And welcome, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to share my journey with you. It turns out that several months ago, I was talking to Dory. It was a catch-up call, and I was sharing with her what I was up to and some of the things I was doing, and she ended up saying, it may be a good idea for you to share your journey with the Revolutionize Retirement crowd, because some of the things that you're doing might resonate with them and them to think in different ways. So that's how I came to be here. I have to make a confession out of the box, and that is it's a lot easier to see patterns through the rearview mirror. I'm sure you all experienced that. So some of what I'm going to share with you includes what I was aware of at the time, but some of it comes from insights I stumbled across through the rearview mirror as I was reflecting on it. In a way, this is another way of saying that my life and work choices may not have been quite as orderly as they might make them appear, and I'm sure that you can all understand that from personal experience. Having said that, most of my life and work choices have reflected the questions I was asking myself at the time and asking of the world as well. As Dory mentioned, I've written a couple of books. One of them is called Becoming a Life Change Artist, 7 Skills for Reinventing Yourself at Any Age with Kathy Jordan. And in retrospect, I think we mistitled part of the book. I'm okay with the first part, Becoming a Life Change Artist. But this reinventing thing, I am less sure about. And part of this second guessing comes from an interview I did with over 100 people in preparation for the book. And as I was interviewing some folks, one of the interviewees shared with me that she thought it was less about change than it was about becoming more whole as a person. And I said to myself at the time, wow, I thought that was a brilliant insight, because we all have so many aspects to ourselves, and for a variety of reasons, I think we end up developing some of them, and some of them more fully, and others we either neglect or avoid. But as we get older, we get back in touch with some of these undeveloped aspects, some of our interests, some of our talents, and we return to them and we begin to cultivate them. And this journey of becoming more whole, more integrated with multiple aspects of ourselves. So in a way, it's a way of becoming at peace with ourselves. I also think that what's true personally is true of the broader world that we live in. So the world moves in fits and starts. Some of the aspects of the world we pay attention to, others we allow to suffer. And in the Jewish tradition, there is a concept called tikkun olam, which means healing the world, which in my mind is another way of saying helping the world become more whole. So I do think that there are parallels between personally becoming more whole and engaging in the world in a way that allows it to become more whole. So for me, the ideal work-life outcome comes together when we're able to weave together the journey of becoming more whole as a person and the world's need for healing. And that brings me to the Max Beckmann quote that's up on the computer or the video, the PowerPoint. Art is created for the sake of realization, not for amusement, for transfiguration, not for the sake of play. It is the quest of ourself that drives us along the eternal and never-ending journey we must all take. So life, like art, I believe, is a quest, and I'd submit it's a quest to find answers to the questions we're asking ourselves. It's a never-ending journey we must take. In other words, it's an imperative. We don't really have a choice. And believe me, I believe we have more choices than we think, but in this case, we must take this never-ending journey. So a little bit of history. And again, Dory filled in resume kinds of high points of my work history. And let me go back and share it with you within a broader context of what were the questions I was asking myself at the time I made some of these life career choices. If you go back a while, in fact, yesterday I celebrated my 76th birthday.
Happy birthday.
I earned a PhD in history, but I learned pretty quickly that academia was not for me. So I knocked around a little bit. I did some consulting with small cities related to social change matters. And then I entered the world of finance, and I built a 21-year career within the American Express orbit, so to speak. And I had multiple careers within that career. I built sales divisions. I ran an investment company. I ran multiple marketing businesses, and I got involved, as I recall, in global strategy as well. So if I reflect back on this period, the theme that unites all of these positions, at least for me, they were all about building something new. Even if I stepped into an existing position, I always entered it with the intention of recreating it and infusing it with new energy. It was about creating new things as a reflection of human-centered values. I was fascinated with the creating process. I like to use the word creating versus creative because creating is a more proactive verb. The creating process of making something from nothing, having it reflect the values of those who build it. And so how do you do that? When I pose these questions, I have no idea what the answers are, but I do pose them. And this was actually reflected in a keynote I was asked to deliver at a leadership conference in 1996. I chose the question as a title for my keynote, and the question was, can a business have a soul? Can a business have a soul? I interviewed many people for that keynote, including the CEO of 3 different major companies. And the answer that I came up with is yes, if by soul we mean a distinctive, sustainable culture built around those things which really matter. I don't think there are very many of them, but there are some. So if my conclusion was yes, then I felt an obligation to make it true in my part of the organization. I always started with a new team by saying to them, I wanted this to be the best work experience of their lives. If they go 20 years from now, they reflect back on the time that we worked together, I wanted to be their best experience, where they were making a difference, they were living their values. And then the question I put to the team was, okay, how do we do this? Again, the questions were at the forefront of work. A lot of people think that work often begins with a vision statement or a mission statement. For me, that happens, but after we begin to pose the questions, the animating questions we're trying to answer. And I was fortunate enough to meet with some success within the corporate world. But then something strange happened in my mid-50s. Stuff was beginning to roil around, and I felt like I was entering a kind of new wilderness. Only the problem was, this time the question I was trying to answer was not at all clear to me. So I went on a search for a question, and I decided that the question then was, what is the question I need to be asking myself? I didn't know, and of course, that caused a lot of unease. Maybe you call that midlife crisis. So I did what any normal person would do at that point in time. I enrolled in a sculpture workshop. The reality is I had not taken an art class since the 7th grade. I was your typical stick figure drawer. I didn't think I was particularly creative, but somehow I wanted to begin to work with my hands and begin to explore or be exposed to the pure creative process. And then after 3 years, I began to move into painting and drawing. So that led in turn to the next big question, at least that presented itself to me, and that is, what in the world is the nature of the creating process itself? And within that, what happens to a person when they enter that process in earnest? Are they changed by it? Are they ennobled by it? What really happens? Do they change as well? So in order to find out more, I did a deep dive into the lives and working processes of many of the great artists. So by then, I stepped away from the corporate world to pursue my interest in art more seriously. The further away I got from the corporate world, however, the more I began to see what I thought were powerful parallels between the creative process of the great artists and the creative process of building a business. In fact, the creative process of any life endeavor. What I came to realize through this inquiry was that every aspect of living is a creative process, and the skills needed to engage in that creative process were the very skills one needed in order to be successful as an artist. So at that point, life and work, for me, life, work, and art were joined in my mind. You really couldn't separate the two out. Living was a form of art making. Art making was a form of living and giving expression to your life. I ended up doing some workshops out in Esalen, and I began to put together some programs using the art in organizations, helping leaders become better leaders, to help them think more innovatively, to lead them, to ask the question, how do we lead with our values? And art, and the arts broadly speaking, was the platform I used to do that. Because I learned that making art requires a very different kind of thinking than traditional thinking, the kind of thinking we're trained in, the kind of thinking that we are taught in MBA programs. Because traditional analytic thinking moves very quickly to pattern recognition. Art making, on the other hand, engages all of our senses, empathy, intuition, symbols, accessing the subconscious. Art making expands the range of possibilities for us and expands the range of learning and the sources of knowing. So that's very different from analytic thinking, which tends to be convergent, and art thinking tends to be divergent. So here I began to realize that the work in reality was about how do you make ourselves, our organizations, more whole as a way to realize their full potential. how does one make change that is sustainable, meaningful, around what really matters? Change not as a social process or even a psychological process, even though those are part of it, but as a creating process. One in which we are more empowered than we even think we are. We're empowered to make meaningful choices. As Beckmann said, along the eternal and never-ending journey we must all take. But there was also something else going on, and I began teaching a program at MIT Sloan in their MBA program called The Leader as Artist. And then I started writing Can Art Save Us? Well, there goes another question, title of the book. And through this teaching, I also learned about a global network of academics, consultants, artists, corporate leaders who were using artistic intervention in organizations with what I would say were interesting but inconclusive outcomes or results. At the same time that I was doing this, I was quite disturbed by the state of the world, and this notion of tikkun olam kept on haunting me. So I started to ask myself, how do you do that? I mean, how do you heal the world? And how do you do that through the arts specifically? So as I was wrestling with that, and after a lot of conversation, I came up with a two-pronged strategy. First was I launched the Global Institute for the Arts and Leadership. And as Dory mentioned, our mission is to build a more peaceful, sustainable, and beautiful world through the arts. Then when Trump was elected, I asked, is there a response that we can provide through the Global Institute for the Arts and Leadership? And I also began to ask the question, what cohort in our society stood the risk of suffering the consequences for the longest period of time at this moment in our history, and who at the same time were the least enfranchised, who had the least power to shape the future. And what I came up with was the notion of kids, children. They don't have the vote, and they're going to be around for longer than most of us. So through the Global Institute, we launched an initiative called Vital New Voices. And Vital New Voices really has about 4 or 5 different components. First of all, young people, juniors and seniors in high school. Number 2, they select a social issue of their choosing that is real in their lives. It could be gun violence, it could be poverty, it could be climate change, it could be income disparity, it could be bullying. They choose it. The third part is they are all mentored by artists, and working with those artists, they then create an artistic work that addresses the social issue, that gives expression to how they're thinking, their attitude, their perspective, their solutions around that particular social issue. Then at the reading or the show or the playing of that exhibit, we invite community stakeholders, public figures, leaders of communities, parents into that presentation, and we have a facilitated conversation about what are our children trying to tell us about this social issue, and how can we align our actions with the spirit of the kids. And each person walks away making a commitment to take one action back in their community in alignment with the kids. So that's basically the Vital New Voices initiative from a conceptual framework. We currently have 2 pilots on the ground. One is in New Haven, working with a nationally recognized artist by the name of Roberto Lugo and a arts agency called ArtSpace and the New Haven Public Schools. And the second initiative is we're working with the Atlanta Public Schools. Our intention, we're at the beginning, middle of these initiatives, these pilots. We intend to learn from them, package them, and think about ways we can scale them nationally. So that was one response to the question. I launched the Global Institute. The second was, again, is...
Before you go on, let me interrupt for 1 second. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. This is great. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was a good break. But the second thing I did was I formed a consultancy called the Kalon Leadership Group. The word Kalon was chosen because it's a Greek word that means the unity of virtue and beauty. And what we basically do is we bring art-based interventions into organizations to help develop leaders, create organizational culture, and to think more innovatively about the challenges that they face. Through Kalon, I've built a strong collaboration with the Art of Science Learning Initiative, which is a 10-year program funded by the National Science Foundation, which is designed to test the impact of arts-based learning in 3 innovation incubators around the country. There's one in San Diego, Chicago, and Worcester, Massachusetts, of all places. And basically, we use art-based learning in an effort to unleash the power of the arts to help leaders create a future that really matters. We've also been able to quantify the impact of this work in organizations, and for the first time, we can document quantifiable impacts in a range of leadership outcomes, including getting better at problem solving, thinking more innovatively, collaboration, and a whole series of other areas. So I'm now in conversation with the Art of Science Learning team about creating a joint independently branded entity to continue to do this work. So those have been 2 of the responses. Another one is I've continued to do my painting, not as much as I'd like, but I continue to do that. And what I find interesting, at least for me, is that when I think about what propels me through the thinking, the painting, again, it's a series of questions. Regardless of what I'm trying to create, I see that creating process as an encounter set of responses to questions. So,
can you say that part again or give an example of?
Sure.
That was, yeah.
So
that it's the responses to the, yeah, just elaborate, yeah.
Regardless of what I'm trying to create, I see that process as a encounter with a series of questions. The sum total of the responses to those questions is the thing we create. It's the path we take. The question I'm wrestling with right now on the canvas is, how do you paint memory? That absorbs me on the canvas. And what I put on the canvas then creates a series of dilemmas. What do I do? What's my response to what I put on the canvas? In an effort to paint memory. How do you paint memory? That's the informing question for me in terms of my artwork right now. So as I step back from all these questions, my own responses, the form they've taken in terms of the work that I've done, the jobs that I've taken, I've reflected on the relationship between the questions we're asking ourselves and the life work choices we make. And I'd try to wind up this portion of it with 3 points. So the questions we're asking ourselves, I would suggest, are signals rather than static. They signal what's bothering us, what's causing us tension, what we're curious about. They're signaling what might actually really matter to us, and we need to pay attention to those questions. The second point I make is questions can be a source of energy or a drain on energy depending on how we choose to respond. If we allow them to generate anxiety, then they can move us away from viewing the questions as openings into new possibilities. If we respond by viewing questions as an opportunity to discover and learn, then I think we can connect with wonder and open up all kinds of possibilities. The third point I would make is that questions are the beginning of making life work choices. They're not the choices themselves. When we embrace the questions, they take us to new frontiers, new possibilities, and new growth. The pursuit of questions, I think, open up choices for ourselves. So I step back again and I ask myself, what's the meta question that informs our lives, or at least challenges us in our lives? And the best answer I have come up with so far is actually a poem by Rilke, and it's called I Live My Life in Widening Circles. And it goes, I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world. I may not complete this last one, but I give myself to it. I circle around God, around the primordial tower. I've been circling for thousands of years, and I still don't know. Am I a falcon, a storm, or a great song? So that's been my journey, how that journey was an outcome of responding to questions that were present in my heart and my mind, in some cases my soul at the time. And they're out there to provoke thoughts and conversation.
Oh, this is fabulous, and there's so much to process. I do want everyone to know that the questions are working. I'm looking forward to people submitting questions to me, again, on the event page, on either the left or bottom, just your comment or your question so that I can integrate this in. You've said so much, Fred, and it's exciting to hear and bear witness to the forward thinking and then backward thinking, since hindsight is always 20/20. So I wonder, there's so many questions we were probably always asking ourselves. And so how do we know which one to listen to respond to, that could become an organizing question for ourselves? What do you recommend that people do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So putting me on the spot here. In a way, I think the questions are an opportunity to reflect, and I would encourage people, and I suspect many of the folks on this call already do, reflect and journal. But when we journal, things come to the surface that when we simply think them, don't see the light of day. So I would really encourage that, and I would listen and jot down the questions, and then look at the questions as an opportunity for stepping into exploration. Let me give you a live example in terms of something I shared with you before, and that is when I launched the Global Institute for the Arts and Leadership. As I mentioned, I felt a need to respond to what I thought was a challenging world, and I want to do it through the arts because I believe that the arts are a powerful platform and medium that can bring people together in different ways, that can cultivate empathy, that can lead to breakthrough thinking and all kinds of other things. But I didn't know how to respond to it, and I began to have conversations with people. And in that process, I came across what ended up being a global network of artists, consultants, corporate leaders, and so on, literally in places like Slovenia and Turkey and the UK and Canada and Brazil and so on. And these people were struggling with that, but they were all doing it in isolation. As I was speaking with these people, I began to say, wow, there's an opportunity here to create a platform where a number of these people can come together and begin to collaborate on real-life solutions using the arts. But then the question was, that's a big deal. And am I up to it? And how do I know if I'm up to it? And at what level do I want to play that game? And so on. So those were the questions I was asking myself once I came up with this notion of a response. And as I was having these conversations, I was testing my reaction to the responses. And I was testing my own reaction to what people were saying. And a strange thing began to happen. Rather than me shying away from it, I got excited. My appetite was building for it. At a certain point, all I can say is a clunk happens. And the clunk is, this is meant to happen, and I'm meant to play a role in this. But that would not have happened if I had not preceded that with a series of questions engaged in through conversations with real people who could give me real-time feedback, ask me questions in return, and those conversations turned out to be a way of testing, learning, and discovery themselves. So I would say a way of doing it is when you begin to encounter those questions, engage in those questions with other folks and listen to what they have to say. But don't only listen to what they have to say, listen to what your body is telling you. Listen to what your emotions are telling you in response to what they have to say. And that will give you clues as to whether you should continue down that path or maybe it's not the right thing.
That's really helpful. So Leslie from Orlando just wonders, when you mentioned about the vital new voices, she just wondered, is there any existing chapters or any involvement in Florida? She's from Orlando.
The quick answer is no, but stand by. As I mentioned, we're doing 2 pilots, one in Atlanta and one in New Haven. What we want to do is take those pilots through from beginning to end. We want to learn what we learn, then step back, and at that point, probably in 2019, we would begin to look for other locations, other organizations that would like to participate in the initiative. And at that point, we can envision a national scaling approach.
Great, thanks. And Lisa from Westboro just has a comment, which she says, every word that trips off of your tongue is a pearl with so much to consider and process. Very inspiring. So rich. Thank you. I just wanted to give you that feedback.
Thank you, Lisa.
Another question that I have is, though you've been talking about both people and organizations becoming more whole rather than just change or reinvention, but what would you say are the most challenging or difficult that people encounter when they're trying to become more whole or change, or whatever word we use? I'd like to become more whole, since it's mind, body, spirit, soul, all of us. What are the difficult and challenging aspects that both you've encountered and also might be helpful for listeners to be aware of?
Sure. I actually think they're all difficult, not impossible. Again, from my interviews and my own experience, I would say different folks have difficulty with different parts of the journey, the change journey, the journey toward wholeness. Part of it is recognizing, I think, that change means change of behavior. And for some folks, that's the most challenging part. We can often imagine what a change might look like, but we don't know how to get there. What behaviors I need to change in order to get to that outcome. That's tough. Some people believe you first need to think differently in order to change, and others believe you need to begin changing behavior first, and then the thinking and feeling part is going to follow. I personally think it's a dance between the two. How you give yourself permission to embrace the dance and the stubbed toes that happen along the way. I think all that influences the texture of the journey. One of my favorite sayings is a French saying, the appetite comes while eating. So even though we may experience some uncertainty, some anxiety, some hesitation, if we step into it, begin to look at it as a opportunity for exploration and discovery. In becoming a life change artist, Kathy Jordan and I call this the creative dilemma. It's creative, or it's a dilemma because there's a tension in our lives. We want to change, but we don't quite know how. It's creative because it's an opportunity to open up new possibilities and make something new and different. So it puts, I think, a positive spin on the challenges that we face in becoming more whole.
Yeah, I found myself thinking a lot about that book of Becoming a Life Change Artist, and I was actually just going to ask you a question about the creative dilemma and how I love the way you talk about dance that sort of goes on between the thinking, the doing, and just that interconnectedness. And I think that's what I'm hearing from you so much, that you're almost offering sort of questioning and thinking about ourselves in different ways, and to think about our own interconnection, it sounds like, between, as we reflect about our own history, what makes us feel alive, and to change that lens that maybe we're looking at. And I keep coming back to some of the things from your book. I just wondered if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think the lens, love the idea of a lens. I forgot who said it. I think it might have been Proust, that discovery is not finding new lands, but learning to see things in new ways. I think that whole notion of there's a kind of magical thing out there that we need to discover, when in truth, what might be in play is the idea that we need to look at ourselves through a different lens, through a lens of possibility and learning, and that this journey of becoming more whole is a journey of self-discovery. Now, along the way, we're going to bump into tensions. We're going to bump into challenges. We're going to bump into, again, what I call a creative dilemma. And if we see it as a creative dilemma, that is an opportunity to explore new possibilities. And along that process, along that path of exploration, we discover new things. And as we discover new things, we've got the choice. Do I want to integrate these new things into who I am, or are they not a good fit for me? And then I'll just go back down that path. Maybe that was a sidebar or a bramble that I got caught up in, and it doesn't apply to me. And every once in a while, we step back from the canvas and we look back to the journey, and we are able to assess whether we feel we are becoming more whole, whether we're tapping into neglected or tamped down aspects of ourselves, and to pull them forward and have them become more manifest of who we are. Yeah, I think that I think we've always got choice, and we often have more choice than we think we do. And one of the choices we have is toward the attitude we're going to take toward change, toward difficult situations, toward creative dilemmas.
That's a great response. It does make me think of actually a client that I have who's had a experience a creative dilemma and trying to figure out how to go forward, but she also needs to continue earning money, and she finds that to be a terribly difficult obstacle. Many things aren't leading her in that direction. How does reality, some of those reality things impinge? What have you seen or thoughts on that?
Yeah, that is not an unusual situation that people find themselves, and I have to acknowledge that it's a very difficult situation to be in, that compelling need to earn a livelihood, to support others. We are responsible adults, but at the same time, we may not be being fulfilled by that work. We may even dislike it or hate it, and it's eating away at us. So how do we deal with something like that? You can potentially actually make a change of work, i.e. job. You can make a change of career. It's not easy, but it can be done. I've done it at least 3 times in my own life, and I would say it's not, I'm making a decision to change and magic, the change happened. It happens over a period of time, but you're beginning to put in place the steps you need to do in order to make that change. So that's one kind of change, but the other change is internal. How could I begin within my current job to begin to redefine what I do and perhaps add value or create value, not only for myself, but for the entity or the organization I'm working with. So I often think that people are brought down or eaten up by the current work that they're doing, that they don't see that work itself as a creative opportunity. This is an art example, and that is Matisse, when he was very poor and beginning to paint, used to go to the Paris flea market and buy old canvases that were already painted. And he would take them, scrape them down, and he'd paint over them. Same canvas, but he would give it new life. The work situation in some ways is a canvas. There are ways to paint over or add to, change the color dynamics, do all kinds of other things to re-enliven the work that you're doing. So I do think there are 2 broad paths. One is to make a change of job or career. The other is internally to put a new lens on the work that you're doing.
Great. Thank you. So I have some other questions here from people, and then I have more of my own. So let's see. Murray in Boston says, how do you actually quantify, or how are you actually going to quantify the impact in the 2 pilots?
Great question. We are working with a assessment group right now, so I don't have a definitive answer, but I would say broadly what we're looking at, well, the question is, what is the impact that we want to make? And I think what's unique about this initiative is we want to make impacts on a range of things. The first impact we want to have is on the kids themselves. And does this work help them in terms of their own leadership, self-leadership, their ability to see opportunities to influence the environment around them? Can we help them become more creative problem solvers? That bundle of impacts on the kids themselves. The second thing we want to do is what's the impact on the community? Does something actually happen in the communities as a result of the kids creating this work, engaging in a social issue, and inviting people from the community into this experience and go back into their communities? What happens there? So I think that there are going to be 2 categories of evaluation. Category number 1 is, are there things that we can quantify? There are things that we can identify ahead of time that we want to measure, number 1. And number 2, are there things that are going to happen as a result of this that will emerge as a result of this work that we have no idea of today? And I believe there are going to be those 2 categories of impact. So we're trying to design an evaluation process for those.
Great, thank you. So I have from Sarah from Woodstock shares from Proust, the quote, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, great.
Thank you, Sarah. And then Martha from Holyoke says, you're speaking to exactly where I am right now. 2 questions have driven and undergirded the last 4 years of my life, starting at age 74. How will I live my remaining days? How will I help others do the same? Now I'll pause. What are the next questions? Perhaps how will I engage in a deeper way with the needs people are discovering at this age to live more consciously than they ever have? What does the world need to do to make this more available to everyone aging? All to explore. And then she says, any other thoughts? Any questions you would ask?
My initial reaction is that these are absolutely profound and exciting questions. Right on. I think those are wonderful questions. And in some ways, they are scary in the sense of the size of those questions, that they're not small. And there's this thing that I believe in. I call it spheres of energy. And what I mean by that is when we begin to talk to other people about things that matter to us, things that we believe in, things that we care about, we generate a sphere of energy around ourselves that in turn activates a sphere of energy around the person that we're speaking with or having a conversation with, or a group that we're having a conversation with. And those spheres of energy then go out into the world and activate other spheres of energy that are aligned with issues and problems and questions we're asking ourselves. So I would encourage, I don't have questions to add to Martha's questions, only to say that they're fabulous questions. And I would encourage Martha to find others to begin to engage in those questions, and you may change the world simply by engaging others in those questions.
Mm-hmm. Which is what it sounds like you've been doing through your initiative, which is very exciting to hear about. So just seeing if there are any other questions here right at the moment. No. Are there any resources that you would recommend to people that could be helpful as people undertake this process themselves?
So I think that there are lots of really good books out there. They're very good. And life change and living on purpose and one's life, and inspirational books, practical books, and anyone can find them on Amazon. But I'd like to suggest a little bit of a different turn here, and that is we tend to default to reading in those areas that we have interest in. And what I've developed a habit of doing is picking up a book here and there in a area or topical area that I don't have interest in, that is foreign to me, that I shied away from, ones that can take me outside of my familiar zone, because I discover all kinds of new metaphors and paradigms to play with when I do that. So I'm not a science guy, but I really enjoy reading Richard Feynman's essays. He's the Nobel Prize-winning physicist. I'm not a technology person, but right now I started reading an extremely provocative and scary book by a fellow by the name of Yuval Harari. It's called Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow. And those bring me into a foreign land. It's like traveling into foreign countries. You discover all kinds of new things that shed light on the areas that you are interested in. So I would just offer that out as a potential opportunity for folks.
And that makes so much sense, and it just expands on what you're saying, which is that thinking in these different ways with three different lenses can get us just exploring in different ways, and then you never know how it's going to integrate for us.
Yes.
What will end up making sense. So how do you find time? I know you said your painting doesn't get quite as much, but you're involved in so many wonderful things, the Global Institute, the consulting, your art, and your family. How do you do it all? How do you manage your time?
I don't. That's the short answer. It's actually hard because I also enjoy naps. At any given moment, something suffers. There's no question about it. I've learned to live with it. That's the dance that I've embraced. I have no formula. I'm overcommitted. It's one of my failures for sure. And I've started to say no to a lot of things, but some of the questions that I ask and the responses that I come up with require that I step into it. And I ask forgiveness for those shortcomings and learn to live with it. And I'm not painting as much as I would like to paint. From time to time, I am late for something that I should not be late for. I've got 6 grandkids, and I try to be with them as much as I can. But on the whole, I would say my performance in terms of meeting the needs of each of those is uneven at best.
Like all of us, it sounds like, when there's a full, vital, exciting life and interaction with life. So if people want to learn more about your work, the Global Institute, initiative, what are ways people can learn more, maybe about in ways? I don't know, kind of maybe just share that with people?
I think they're the usual suspects. There are a couple of websites. One is for the Global Institute. It's artschangeleaders.org. The Kalon Leadership Group is kalonleadershipgroup.com. There is the artofsciencelearning.org. So those are websites that I'm in. And the Becoming a Life Change Artist book with Kathy Jordan is out there, Can Art Save Us, is really very different from Becoming a Life Change Artist. It's a personal reflection on creativity. When I was doing a series of paintings that tried to recreate the first 5 years of my life, I began to take notes in my sketchbook and reflect on those. And at a certain point, I realized that there was something here more than just notes. So I moved them into a book, and it's interesting, actually. That's another thing that you can take a look at.
Great, and I do, as I said, I do recommend both of Fred's books. I do have another comment right at the moment from Martha, who responded back to you, and she says, just a comment, thank you so much for the affirmation. I find myself a bit scared, as there is a part of me that has been trying to surface, but backing away from the big challenges in leadership. That's been a life pattern to play smaller than I really am. I guess that's the next thing to grapple with. so that I don't die with regrets.
Thank you. Any sensible leader or any sensible person who's engaged in a journey of change, who is not accompanied by fear and uncertainty, is not being truthful with themselves.
Excellent point, and I think we all need to underscore that. Fred, this has just been totally wonderful. Other last thoughts, takeaways for people thinking about kind of the roads taken and the questions, and what should be the final takeaway?
I think that we are all, if you excuse the expression, points of light in the world, and that as we go about traveling our path, traveling our journey, taking the road, that we all think of each other and the lights that we bring into the world and get inspiration, encouragement from each other. I know that over the past number of years, as an example, Dora, you mentioned the Life Planning Network. That organization was instrumental in inspiring me, and I think of everyone who's been part of that as I go and do my work as an ongoing source of inspiration. So I think that journey of change of becoming more whole, while it's an individual set of choices, we can draw encouragement and inspiration from each other's journeys.
And I think I can speak for myself and also everybody on this call that you are a wonderful, inspiring source of inspiration. I guess that's using the word twice in a sentence, which isn't such a good idea, but the way you're living your life and the questions that you've posed that have taken you in the directions it has through your journey, I think are so inspiring. And to see what you're doing now and the pilots and what may come. We do need a salvation or salve for what's happening in this world. And I think that your global initiative and the use of art and the use of creating, I like the idea of the proactive creating rather than just creativity, but the creating together and working together and collaborating is so important. So I just want to thank you so much for saying yes to this. I know you said you're saying no to other things, but that you said yes to being part of this call. And I think that you've touched many lives today. So I want to thank you so much and wish you a very happy birthday.
Yes, thank you. Again, thanks for the opportunity. And whatever inspiration I provide is an outcome of the inspiration others have provided me. That's for sure.
Great. Thank you.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.